Okay, so good morning, everyone. I'm hoping everyone can hear me okay and can see the copyright for thesis that's up on the screen. So my name is Anthony O'Brien. I'm the copyright advisor here at the university, and a lot of the thesis copyright questions come to me, but we also do have another team that looks after them, and we'll talk about that as part of the session. So joining me today are my two research liaison librarian colleagues. We have Jenny Schoolander.
Hello.
And Nicole Gammy.
Hello.
And they're also going to be co-presenting and moderating our questions. So I'll kick over to Nicole and we'll get started.
Fabulous. So before we commence on the interesting stuff and the idea of the topic of today's webinar, initially I'd like to acknowledge, do acknowledgement of country. So UON acknowledges the traditional custodians of the lands within our footprint areas. That's the Wabikal Nation, Darkinjung Nation, Biripi, Worimi, Woronua and Eora nations. We acknowledge elders past, present and emerging and the knowledge they share. So a little bit of housekeeping. Please, if you've got any questions, post them in the chat. We'll pause at certain points through the presentation to answer anything, and then we'll stop longer at the end to pick up anything else that that comes up as we go through. As Anthony's already said, the session is being recorded, and an email will be sent with a link to anyone who's registered, regardless of whether you're here today or not. And if you've got any specific questions, please email after the session. We're always happy to help you out in relation to that. Alrighty, so today's session is looking at copyright for thesis. So if you can't quite get enough of copyright, please come and join us in a couple of weeks when we do the Creative Commons licensing, which is an important component to consider. So all jokes aside, please consider coming along and finding out about more about Creative Commons, because it's increasingly becoming an important aspect to consider. If you happen to miss last week's entertainment value, which was Know Your Rights about copyright, there's a session on YouTube. You're welcome to go and have a look at that. And again, if you've got any questions, certainly about the previous one that we don't quite cover, or we haven't quite answered for you, then please get in touch with us and we can help you out there. All right, let's get into the nuts and bolts. So generally speaking, you own the copyright of your thesis. But in saying that, what you need to do is you need to be careful, because often there can be layers in a thesis. In a lot of cases, people have published before. They may have published a journal article or something else. And the thing is that when you publish a journal article, there's a chance that you may have signed your copyright over to somebody else. If you then look to reuse that as part of your thesis, you may need to check to make sure you know exactly who owns the copyright. So please be a little bit careful. And as usual, and as always, external materials that you reuse will be owned by somebody else, and you do need to consider the copyright here. The big thing about the bottom point is it's really important to keep a note about where you get stuff from. It'll make it a lot easier down the track, and we'll talk more about that towards the end. Alrighty, so we've got a bit of a case study going here. So I'm going to ask you to have a yes/no answer in the chat for me, please, at the end of this particular slide. So we've got Yusuf and Sarah. There's two PhD candidates. So Yusuf has used Google Images. He's added a source caption to the figures that he's put in his thesis, and he's reused an article that he co-wrote as part of his thesis work. Sarah, on the other hand, has written her thesis from scratch, but she hasn't quite got around to the referencing bit yet. Ouch. But she has sent a copyright question to the email address. So given our two candidates here, do you think there's any problems with what they're doing and the approaches that they've taken to date? Just a simple yes, no, not asking you to pick out specifics. Just if you want to just dump something in the chat, any ideas about that? Come on, don't be shy. I was going to say there's... Fabulous.
Yes.
I've had a few bites.
Yes.
Thank you very much. And very much you're right on that front. There are a few concerns about that. The big thing to notice is the use of Google Images. The big thing with that is what you need to do is understand what the copyright licensing is behind those. It may be okay, it may be not. So please check into those. And if you're not sure, then please ask. And again, as I mentioned earlier, the other thing that Yusuf needs to be a bit careful about is reusing an article he co-wrote, needs to check the licensing agreement in terms of when he signed the agreement about publishing that, what he may have signed away. On the other hand, Sarah's, I guess, got a few more things, a few less challenges, but the big thing that she'll have, which could be a bigger challenge than what Yusuf is facing, is about the referencing. That can be, well, that is incredibly important to do. So make sure you reference as you go in some way so that you can actually know where you've got stuff from. But then on the other side of the coin too, there's some positive things. The fact that we've added sources to the captions, captions to the figures is really important so people know where things are coming from. The fact that Sarah's writing her thesis from scratch, she hasn't got some of the issues about recycling things. And if she's got a query, she's reached out for some help. So, terrific. Most copyright material is has a most material has copyright unless it's in the public domain and in terms of being otherwise noted. But the thing is, even with that, you want to make sure that that's in fact the case. So making third-party material available without permission risks infringement. So please don't go there. If you're not sure about things or you can't quite work things out, that's when you really do need to reach out and just ask. And material found online can be especially problematic. Think about, especially with social media or some of the images that keep getting passed on and that sort of thing. How do we know who really owns the original content? It can be a bit of a challenge to find out. So when you do use things, as noted before, please make sure that you keep a note of where you've got it from, and also with the referencing as well. So where we tend to run into most of the problems is through things what we call reproduction and communication. So reproduction from a copyright perspective, okay, might be different in terms of how you might interpret it otherwise, is talking about copying and some reuse. When we're talking about communication here, we're talking about sharing with others. An example of that could be putting it in Nova. So you do need to be careful in terms of even thinking about things like that. So some of the things where the challenges can arise, and that's just maybe you maybe not be aware of what some of these are. So it's things like photographs, images, maps, charts, memes. Please be careful. And there's a few more on the list as well. We've got that are also an issue. So please, so we've got the first lot, we're looking at images. The second lot are looking at text-based works. So tables of information, web content, articles, statistical notes. Again, please be a little bit careful if you're using some of this stuff to make sure that you know where the copyright sits. So with that, are there any questions at the end of that first little section? And thank you to those who had a go at answering my question for me.
There's no questions at this stage.
Fabulous. I'll hand over to Anthony, who will take it from here.
Okay, so Nicole has touched on this already, but a lot of people don't realize that when you actually publish something, usually you are transferring the copyright over to the publisher. Now, there are some exceptions. Sometimes when you publish open access, you get to keep the copyright and they just put a license on it. But for the most part, most of the high use, I guess, high citation journals, they're with the big publishers, and you will transfer the copyright over as part of that agreement. Now, they usually give you a few kind of what they call usage rights back, but some of them are interesting. And if you want to know more about that, check out the video that we did last week. That's the Know Your Rights. That was a big part of that one. As I did mention in the last session, it is possible to make adjustments via an author addendum, and we talked about that last week. So if you Google Spark, SPARC, you'll find some things about that, and that usually gives you the ability to hang on to a few more rights if you are publishing, and the more rights you hold on to, the more kind of accessibility you're able to have with your article and what you then do with it. So yeah, like I said, if you want to know more about this side of things, check it out. As far as permissions go with publications, so one of the things that students at Masters and RHD level, and even honors too, get confused about is that they may have been really used to doing assessments for their undergraduate or other classes. And pretty much with the undergraduate, you're allowed to use whatever you want. And as long as you kind of vaguely put some reference on it, you know, you're usually good. That's because you can do that under a specific section within the Copyright Act. Students are covered by an exception called research or study fair dealing. And that's all good. But when you hit this level where you're dealing with a thesis or an exegesis too, for those that are in the creative arts fields, it's classed as a publication. So it adds that extra layer of complexity on for copyright. Yay! So yeah, keep that in mind. A thesis is very different to an undergraduate assessment, and you need to treat it like you're going to be, doing a journal article or a conference paper or that level of publication. That means that if you've already signed over your copyright to a publisher, you need to look into what rights you have around reuse and whether or not you do need to seek permission, and even the versions of the articles, which we will talk about a little bit, will change. So yeah, the publishers don't have one kind of set standard for what they allow. And you might think, oh my God, I'm pulling my hair out, I don't want to do this, but don't worry, there are plenty of support structures in place, including the copyright team. The other thing to think about when you are publishing is whether or not you're going to go with those kind of all rights reserved type journals. So these are the standard copyright where you sign the publishing rights over, and then basically everything is restricted under standard copyright. So people need to get permissions. If you're lucky enough to publish somewhere that has an open license, it opens up a lot more reuse options for both yourself and for other people. So just keep that in mind. If you do have an option to publish open access, and we do, if you look at our last session around open access and that type of stuff, we go into great depth there about some of the support and even monetary support options that we have in place here at the university around open access. So I try to feed as many of the real questions in that I get into these sessions as possible. So a lot of people have gone like, oh, but I'm referencing it. That's fine, isn't it? That's enough. It's not. So under the Copyright Act, there's what's known as insubstantial use. So this is something like a very small snippet of text, that type of stuff. So referencing will cover a short quote. That's fine. It won't cover too much of anything else. So anything like a figure, a graph, a large table, extended slabs of text, all of that is considered substantial and will need permission for reuse. And I noticed there's a typo there with a dash that I've missed, but that's all good. I'll fix that for the next version. So one of the good things is that theses are, as much as they are considered a publication, they are kind of in a category of their own, because publishers realize that you guys are basically going to be potentially be early career researchers for them, and they want to kind of give you a little bit of a little bit of a push there, because you're going to be generating money for them later. So quite often publishers will allow you to reuse the entire article in your thesis, but the version will vary. And what I mean by that is spelled out on the next slide here. So there are usually 3 versions that are considered for a publication, depending on what stage it's at. So you may have heard some of these terms posted around the place. So preprint, this is your initial author manuscript version. So it's usually the version you come up with before you submit to the journal. The mid stage is the post-print, also known as an author final manuscript. This is where it's kind of a reasonable way into the submission process. So it's gone through peer review and it incorporates those changes from that peer review process. And then you've got what's known as the version of record. This is the actual publisher PDF that's taken from the database or the journal site. So most people want to go, hey, I'm just going to put the version of record straight into my thesis. Done. Some publishers will allow this, some don't. So you may need to go back a step to what's known as the post-print version. We usually don't recommend you use a preprint unless you are really, really early on. So I had a HDR student recently where she'd literally just written the article. It was going to end up being published in her thesis before it got accepted to the journal. And that's something that if ever you're concerned about, you can have a chat to me about. So technically, yeah, she was using a preprint version, but that was just because it was so early on in the publication process. Usually the second and third are the better options, and we can help sort that out.
Thanks, Anthony. Just before we move on, there has been a question from Mary, and Nicole's put an email address into the chat, but I just wanted to find out if you had anything extra to add. So Mary's asking, What email address should I contact to get some help with copyright in relation to my thesis and an article I published in a journal? I have been asked to write a book chapter also. The journal editor has sent me a link to their policy. Thanks. Is there anything else you wanted to add besides your email address?
Yeah, so there are a couple of teams that actually help with copyright around theses, and I do have a slide for this later, so you can kind of capture the information, but we might as well say it now as well. So usually there's kind of a division that happens with the support. So we have our scholarly publications team. These are the people that run Nova. That's our online repository for those that haven't heard that name before. And they have a massive list around all the stuff to do with open access and the publishers, and then, open access for the article itself, version open access for, use in a thesis. So if in doubt, you can email copyright@Newcastle, and if it's not something that I would usually answer, I will give it to the other team. But their email is library-thesis@newcastle.edu.au, if you'd like to add that to the chat maybe. But like I said, it will be coming up on a slide later. So that team specifically looks after the reuse of articles and things like that. So say, for example, you're publishing with Taylor and Francis. They will know what versions that you're allowed to use. If you're publishing with Elsevier, they'll have all that on file too. So usually people that are doing an article and they're interested in that open access side of things, they might also like to submit the article to Nova so that it stands separately, and they can help you with that too. The more of your publications you're able to make open access, the more citations you'll generate for yourself. There's been research that proves this. And yeah, that team is very, very helpful in that space. But if ever you're unsure about who to contact, just send it to copyright@newcastle.edu.au, and we'll make sure it gets to the right people.
Thanks, Anthony. There's another question from Lisa. Is the post-print version the version after accepted by the journal, but before proofreading?
Usually proofreading happens with the post-print version, but some journals may have slightly different policies. Usually once it's gone through that peer review process and it's incorporated those changes, that's what's known as the post-print. There may be some kind of fine tuning that gets done between that post-print version and the version of record. Usually it's things like formatting for the journal, and they may have spotted some things like, we might be using Australian English and it didn't get picked up to this point, so they've converted it over to American, and those types of small changes. But yeah, usually once it hits that peer review process, all that stuff kind of gets ironed out. But yeah, there can be some small changes that get made between the post-print and the version of record. It's usually not a lot, but it's enough that it's considered a distinct version. And that final version, like I said, includes all the formatting and layout of and the logos and things of the journal, which is why they're very protective of how it gets used.
Thanks, Anthony. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about seeking permissions, and we're going to show a few examples in a moment. But basically, you can find where to submit permissions or to find the permissions online somewhere. A good place to start is having a look at the abstract page of a journal or an article to find out if you're able to use that. There's a permissions link, and again, I say we'll be having some examples of that coming up soon. And quite often you can see the permissions that are being given to you. They're actually stated, but if you're not quite sure, you can always contact the copyright holder directly and find out about the permissions there. And then also that will function as a license for reuse. Yep. And then again, as I said, we're going to look at these a little bit in a little bit more detail in our next webinar, which is on the 19th. But briefly, I'll just talk about some of the copyright licenses that can be used, that you will need a formal request to get permission. So you have Creative Commons licensing, and that is going to allow you to use things in all sorts of ways. You may also see some others that are appearing in the material that you're using. There'll be, these abbreviations like MIT, GPL, any of those sorts of things. Or you may see something that's free to use for study or research, and that's something that's really useful to be able to find. So they're all within the Creative Commons area. The big thing to remember is that you must always read any of the licensing terms and any of that information that you can find, so that you know exactly what you can be doing and what you can't do with the resources. And this sometimes will involve you doing a little bit more investigation, track down exactly who owns the original work and make sure that you're following any licenses, any agreements, any of the copyright is being abided by. So you'll also see that some licenses grant specific permissions, but there will also be certain requirements around those. And you'll see these initials, the NC, which is non-commercial, ND, non-derivatives, SA, share alike, all these very fancy and sometimes confusing initials, but it does become a little clearer once you're dealing with these things. And there's always lots of places to go to find what exactly does this mean. You've always got to provide the attribution of the license, you know, and any information that's there as well. Make sure that you use that kind of license, any of these materials within the permission of whatever the copyright holder has asked you to. But again, there's more on this copyright in our next webinar on the 19th of May.
Yes,
Yep.
and we do have a question. So the first question is from Liz, and it asks, I have adapted and then added to a table / figure from a book and then referenced the original I adapted. Should I still email the author?
Yes, it's one of those things that people ask a lot. It's like, oh, but I've made changes to it. That means I can just reference it, right? Usually no. Now, tables of text are interesting. Some of them, there's an interesting thing in copyright, and sometimes even I have to stop and look at it. There needs to be a certain level of originality for something to be copyrighted. So if you've literally just got a table full of, so one of the examples I've had was somebody had a table full of chemical elements that they wanted to reuse. That's literally just a table of facts, and facts can't be copyrighted. So my suggestion was that this person could basically just recreate the table themselves and they'd be perfectly fine, and they wouldn't need to do it. But in the case of something coming from a book, it may be some kind of synthesis or summary that's had a reasonable amount of work and effort put into it. So in that case, it could meet the originality test, which means that you would therefore need permission even if you adapted it. So good rule of thumb, if you're unsure, you can run it by me, or the easiest thing is usually just reach out to the publisher and get the permission for it. Just cover your bases. That's usually always a good bet. And if you don't hear back from them, you know, reach out to the copyright email and we'll go from there. So just one thing to flag where you are looking at permissions, because I realized I didn't include this on the slides. Sometimes with the online stuff, so if you go to the journal site, which we're about to do in a moment, and work through and request the permission, they're instantaneous. And that's great. I like those ones. I'm a big fan of anything you get straight away. There are other times that you'll kind of flick an email out into the void and hope for the best. Just to flag, you know, permissions can take time. If it goes to somebody that doesn't have the right level of clearance to sign off on it, they could then have to discuss it with somebody else. It may go to, I've had situations where it's gone to like a monthly meeting where the CEOs needed to sign off on it for some reason. That was what they decided. So sometimes it can take a while to get the process back. So the good publishers will usually, you know, at least flick you an email back and say, oh, hi, we're going to look into this and we'll get back to you. But if you don't hear anything back, please still allow a reasonable amount of time. Somebody contacted me recently and said, oh, it's been a week, I haven't heard anything. It's like, maybe just give it another couple of weeks. And about a week after they contacted me, they actually got their response. So it can take weeks rather than days to get the responses. So plan accordingly. Nicole talked about earlier keeping track of your sources, and we are going to show some resources around that later. I just wanted to apologize too, for some strange reason, this current slide has gone everything to underlined when there should literally only be 2 sections that are underlined. One was Nova and the other was the library thesis email. But yeah, I just wanted to say that.
I was going to say, just before you do get onto that slide, Anthony, I have another question for you. It comes from Lisa, and she's asked, is there any place where we can confirm material is in the public domain?
So yes, public domain is an interesting thing. I'm trying to remember if I've put anything about it in this slide. I was also working on the one for the next session. This is around the same time as I'm finalizing this, so I think it's more in the other one. But one of the things that people get confused about is thinking that public domain just means it's publicly accessible. That's not actually true. For copyright, public domain is always capital P, capital D, and it means the material is out of copyright for whatever reason. And there are lots of reasons why material could be out of copyright. Some of it's age, some of it's due to the function, or there's technicalities that weren't followed and all kinds of stuff. So it's one of those interesting things. There are some rulings. So in Australia, any image before 1955 is considered out of copyright now. There are some other things too. The other problem too is that there are different copyright legislations around the world. So something that's out of copyright in the US may not technically be out of copyright here. Yay, copyright's fun. But usually I do rule of thumb where if you are, most of the major publishers in the US, if you found something that a US site is saying is out of copyright, it's a reasonably safe bet to use it, because the major publishers are based in the US. So, if you kind of follow some of that public domain stuff there. Public domain that isn't a Creative Commons Zero license, which again, talking more about in 2 weeks, the actual public domain where something is out of copyright, it is really reliant on someone stating for you that it's out of copyright. So if you go to Wikimedia Commons, for example, and you're searching through the images and you find something there that suits your needs and it says it's public domain, you are kind of relying on that other person's assessment. But again, if you're really nervous, you can talk to us and we'll help you sort it out. Hopefully that answers the question.
That's it. So please, continue.
All right. So I'll just quickly finish off this one and then you can keep going. We're both in the same room, so we look at each other. So yes, this is heavily underlined just to make sure you get the point. No, not really. So Nova is within the library, and it's the place that is looking after any of the online digital theses and also any of the articles that are produced by any of our researchers. So it's an online repository, it's an online database. So you can contact Nova about any of these things. The scholarly publishing team is also the team that is looking after all of these things that are going to help you determine what the publishers need and which version they want and how you can reuse anything in your thesis. And Nicole had previously put this contact email address into the chat. So if you've got any questions about depositing your thesis or what might be needed for publishing purposes, get in touch with Nova through the library thesis link, or get in contact with Anthony at the copyright email.
Great stuff. Just to flag too, Nova actually have 2 different email addresses. So the one on the screen is specifically for the thesis options. They also have NOVA, so nova@newcastle.edu.au. If you're wanting to go down that open access pathway for everything else. I'm just going to click out. It's all right. I've got Nova here. Oh, Nova did not open. Okay, so for whatever reason, it does not want to open in the screen that I've got. So I was going to show it to you there, but I'm just going to cut my losses and move on. Okay. So I'm hoping everybody can see the blue screen at the moment. So I'm actually going to go off and work through some real examples just to show people how you might want to go about going off and getting those permissions online. So I've chosen a particular theme here around Aboriginal health promotion. So this is an article that I want to reuse, say, an image or a table or a graph from. So basically what we're looking for is this permissions type thing. And these do pop up in different places. So here I am on the actual journal site. Looking here, the other examples do have some different things. So I just wanted to pick a few different ways to show you. So if you click on permissions, it will take us through to this Copyright Clearance Center, or CCC, rights link page. Now, if ever you've missed the fact that something is open access via Creative Commons license, what should happen is what's popping up here, where it says point blank, oh, this one is made available via Creative Commons. It has this lovely CC BY license on it, which is that attribution license. So basically you can take it and do what you want with it as long as you follow the licensing information. And oh, that's interesting. They did not link to the actual license. I'm going to have to go off at them about that. That's what I get for not checking things. Where are we? Here we go, licenses. If I'd realized that, I would have gone straight to the page. Didn't want to go to Google because I haven't included Google in my rights slide at the end. Oh, that's annoying. It's going to take forever. Okay. So anyway, if you Google CCBY, it will take you straight to it. I'm really annoyed that that did not go straight there, because what's the point of a link that doesn't go to where it should? So anyway, follow the terms of the license that's there. They're not all CC BY. So some of them, as Jenny mentioned, may have a non-commercial element. We're going to go into what all the different licenses mean a lot more in the next webinar in 2 weeks for copyright. But yeah, basically, a thesis does not count as commercial use. So if you see non-commercial there, you're all good. So that's that one down. Great, we've worked out what our license is on it. We don't have to do any more. We just follow the license that's there. So our next one here is from the Australian Dental Journal. So you'll notice there's no permissions slide here. So if we go and have a look at the actual page, we need to locate where that permissions or rights option is. So it's not going to be under share. Let's have a look under tools. I already know it's under tools. So there it is there, request permission. And again, it's taking me straight through to this CCC rights link. So a lot of the major publishers rely on this Copyright Clearance Center to do the heavy lifting for them so that they don't have to deal with people straight away. So for something like this, it's not saying that there's a Creative Commons license on it. So we need to kind of work our way through and tell it what we're going to use it for, and then it will generate the license for us. So I'm going to reuse it in a thesis. And as I give it information, it asks me more. So you are not the author of this article. So just university academic, that's your use. The format, strictly speaking, most theses are done electronically nowadays, but I usually still suggest you do the print and electronic just to cover any usage that might be made during the examination process, just to, just to tick that box. So this is where you get to choose what you want to do. So for most people, it's going to be a figure or a table, but there are other options there. And it will give you a couple of little things up here. So most people only use one. In most cases, you're not going to translate. So translation here is the literal meaning where you're changing it into another language. If you're not doing that, just put no. Change your currency to Australian dollars. And you might be balking at this point. You're like, oh, they're talking about money. Usually a reuse in a thesis is free. You just have to put the currency in there so that then when you click on the quick price, fingers crossed, if we've done it right, it should come up as 0. So once you get through this point and it's come up as 0, yay, then you just click on continue. It'll take you through into the Copyright Clearance Center proper. If you already have an account with them, just log in. It'll ask you for a few more details, specifically what page the figures that you want to use are on, that type of stuff. If you haven't set up an account with them, just click on the register option and that will take you through. So CCC is very, very easy. It makes thesis permissions very, very simple. You saw how quickly I filled that form out. There's a couple, literally 2 more steps to register yourself if you haven't already done it, and then do a bit more information, and it will literally give you the permission straight away. Done. The other good thing about this Copyright Clearance Center is that it will actually keep all your permissions collated for you in your account. And it's usually up around here. Under your account options, you can click on that and do it. But it also gives you a screen straight away. Once you get the permission, you can just PDF it and then store it in your records if you're wanting to do that. So the other thing to be careful of here, and it is actually stated in some of this text, is that it's not actually supplying you with a copy of the figure or whatever. You need to get that via our databases. And that is one of the things I've been asked about before. So go and get a copy of the article or the figure out of the actual database proper via our subscriptions, and then get your permissions from the Copyright Clearance Center here. So then we have a different example here. So this one's with a different publisher, and that's this one. So some of the publishers are interesting when it comes to their permissions, and they want a lot more information than what the Copyright Clearance Center gives them. So again, we just need to locate where that permissions option is. And we're going to request permissions. And you can see here the form is different. I have Lean Library, the plugin, which is why I keep getting those pop-ups. So it's going to be academic. And then you just fill your details out. I don't know how much of this I'm going to do, but so there we go. So use in a thesis. Oh, there we go. So I can actually continue without actually putting all my details in. So we're not requesting the article. They want to know the extract and all that. So which university, the title. Now, one of the things that you do generally get asked about what the title of your thesis is going to be. If you don't have that exact idea locked down, just give them the rough kind of planned title. If you think it's kind of going to be roughly called that, just put that in. The repository URL, so that's the Nova link, and you need to put down it's considered open deposit. So that's where your thesis would be made open access to everybody. And then do the capture and then submit. And these ones, they may get back to you straight away. It may actually go off to somebody to kind of get the sign off. Like I said, Taylor and Francis are really quite restrictive around their usage, and they want to know everything. They want to know all the details. So yeah, this one might take a little bit of time to come back to you. And then a favorite one, the random document I found on the web. So I found this on the web. What can I do with it now? So this is actually something from New South Wales Health. It took me quite a while to find something that I could actually make part of this webinar, because the webinar is going onto YouTube. So I couldn't just choose any random thing from the web. So I've got this lovely health plan from New South Wales Health. Usually with these ones, we just need to have a look at the copyright information. And most of the time it's spelled out here. Quite often with the government stuff, you'll find they've already slapped a Creative Commons license on it, and that makes it really easy for reuse. So this one here, it may be produced in whole or part for study or training purposes, subject to the inclusion of an acknowledgement of the source. It may not be used for commercial usage or sale. So basically, and I have actually queried this before with a government department, study, as far as they're concerned, also includes research. So I mentioned that study and research option that's in the Act. It's kind of part and parcel as far as these things are going. So if you wanted to reproduce something from your thesis, and I do have a real example of this coming up in the slides, we could do that. We just have to provide the appropriate copyright notice, and we're good to go. So do we have any questions at this point?
Hi, Anthony. Yes, Liz just wants to confirm, is CCC rights link for articles only, or can you use it for books?
Okay, so rights link tends on the majority to be for articles, but if you're using a book that a publisher like, say, Taylor and Francis or Elsevier or Springer has actually made part of their online platform, you may find that it will take you through to rights link for that as well. You'll just see a slightly different form. It's not, let's just say it's not uncommon, but it's not exactly common either, if that makes sense. Ebooks are an interesting thing, but Usually if if the book you've got is only a print version, normally you would need to go online. You could find the publisher's contact details and do it that way, and they may have an online different contact form that may include some copyright stuff in there, and that's usually what I find most people get access to actually get that kind of book or even conference presentation type permission. Again, if ever you get stuck and you can't find the information that you need, reach out and we're more than happy to do the digging for you. I'm going to go back to full presentation mode. Now, I forget, was this one still me? Okay, good. We divvied the slides up earlier and I got to a grand one like, Okay, so Nicole's talked about this already, and I realized I did not open up the spreadsheet that I need, so I'm just going to quickly do that while I'm chatting. I need to get to the right thing. I'm going to drag this across in a sec. But yes, we've already talked about it. To save time and tiers, and I've included tiers on that slide because from experience, there have been a few tiers around some copyright. If you make note of your sources, make note of the permissions that you have and that you still need, it's going to be a lot easier for you later on. I'm just opening up this PowerPoint, and of course, it's fighting me. Oh, there we go, it's opening. Oh, and it's going to make me log in, of course. Bear with me here. So I'll just keep talking. So yes, the more information that you have around it, the easier it's going to be for you to kind of tie off the loose ends later. We have got a spreadsheet if anyone's interested. So you can either create your own version or you can borrow this one. I'm just going to go back to the slide while I'm waiting for that to think. As I mentioned, if you've got that account with a creative, sorry, wrong Cs, with the Copyright Clearance Center, they will actually store your journal permissions for you, but you may still like to bring them down. Depending on how many permissions you have, most people it's only 1 or 2, but I have supported some students that have like hundreds of copyright permissions. So the more you have, the more you might like to break it down by chapter. Keep a note of where you're getting it from. Links are important. Links are important, saying that twice. Keep a note of what you're planning to use, any reuse notes or permissions you found, and keeping a list of that contact information is also helpful as well. Now, hopefully that spreadsheet has actually opened. Yay! So here is a version that we've kind of put together. Like I said, you may like to create your own version, but if you want to, reach out and we're more than happy to share it. So basically just having all the information about the item, so the author, publication date, title, the item type that we're planning on reusing, a URL or a digital object identifier, so the links, when you actually got it, what you're planning, where you're actually planning to put it in your thesis is useful. Is it a insubstantial amount? Is it a substantial amount on what you're planning on doing? Are you making any changes to it? That might be important to keep a note of. Is it something that's not required? So an insubstantial amount of text. Is there an open license attached? Are there any other permissions that you found around it? Do you need to get permission from the rights holder? And that kind of, where am I up to with that, and any notes? So if anyone's interested in getting a copy of this, please reach out and we're more than happy to share. But yes, I honestly can't stress this enough. The more prepared you are around this, the less time it will take you later. I had a look at the actual thesis pages that were put online by Graduate Research, and they have copyright kind of in the, oh, you're almost done. And it's like, yeah, it really needs to be in the, so you're getting started. And also in the, so you're almost done. But keep that in mind. So here's, oh, just before we move on to this, any questions?
Yes, as she tries to unmute.
I was going to say, yes, there is one, Anthony. It's been asked, is there any issue or copyright of trying to copy a journal / thesis chapter structure and the way they present their results without copying their text and data? So just thinking.
Oh, if you're just following somebody's template for how they've laid something out, that's usually fine. If you're directly reproducing the format of the journal with all their particular logos and things like that, not so fine. But yeah, if you've just gone, oh, I really like the way this person has laid something out in this table, I'm going to take that idea and kind of do it. Yeah, there's no kind of, well, I suppose there's no kind of problem with copyright around, the way somebody has formatted something to that level. So yeah, if you just like the way somebody's laid some information and you're going to want to lay your information out the same way, that should be perfectly fine. Speaking of laying things out, segues. Here's an example. So this is actually from that government report earlier. I really like this pyramid that they were using there, and I want to reproduce that in my thesis as a way of making a point. And I'm just going to point out here, these next couple of slides are all formatted for APA 7. Your referencing style may have different requirements, but it is still important to have some kind of caption around your figure, going way back to slide number, whatever it was about Yusuf and Sarah. So yeah, having that information here makes it a lot easier for people to work out where it came from, and it makes it really easy for you to slap that copyright information on there too. So again, laid out for APA 7, I've got my referencing bit that I need, and then following my practice, I'm putting the copyright information in, and I know I have permission, so I'm just adding that reprinted with permission. And again, this is formatted for APA 7. There are other ways you can say this. You can say reuse with permission or reproduce with permission, but APA likes reprinted, so that's what we've got there. And then this is a completely new one because I wanted something that I could use with a license. So here is a massive document. So this is something where I was talking about earlier where it's technically just text and there may be some factual content in there, but there's a lot of work that's gone in to lay all this out in this certain way. So this would definitely be copyrighted. So luckily, this was all, this was published in an article which is licensed under Creative Commons. So this is under the Attribution 4.0 license. So you may see a lot of stuff online about how to attribute Creative Commons. For a thesis, it's perfectly fine to put all your normal referencing in and then just include the statement about the license on the end. This meets all the requirements of Creative Commons, and we will talk about all of that stuff in the 1 in 2 weeks on the 19th. So yeah, I don't have to do anything extra as far as my referencing goes. I just put all that in and then put this. And I've just made these red so they stand out. By the way, you don't have to make them red. But again, formatted for APA 7. And you can see I'm doing all this anyway. It doesn't take much extra to kind of sign off on those copyright requirements. So we're coming to the end of the session. Just do a little bit of wrap up now. Best practice. It goes without saying, but I felt like it was still worth saying. Avoid infringement. Infringement is not good. Wherever you can, make it easy on yourself and find materials that are appropriately licensed. I had a student recently who was wanting to reproduce some content from the floods that were up Maitland Way. And we had a choice of an image that was taken from a newspaper up that way, who I won't name, or that was fully copyrighted and oh my God, you'd have to seek permission for this, or some stuff that a local community group had put online and published under Creative Commons. And she's like, which one would I go with? And it's like, okay, well, do you want to have to contact somebody and wait? And she's like, no. And I said, well, there's your answer. Creative Commons, the license is baked in. Is the photograph actually going to meet your needs? Yes, it was. She found one that was almost exactly the same. And she had that license built in, so she didn't have to think about it. So yeah, save yourself time and stress wherever possible. Try and find something that's appropriately licensed. Again, just reinforcing that. Keep track of where you're getting it from, what permissions are needed, and confirm with either the publisher or the copyright team here, wherever needed. Always provide attribution. So it could just be referencing some of the other things, just like a little extra statement added if you're going to use it. So yeah, whatever that requirement is around attribution, make sure you include it, because otherwise you're technically not meeting the needs of the license and it could be seen as infringement. And again, reach out if you're not sure. You can reach out to the research liaison librarians, get the title right, or to myself, and we're more than happy to help. It's literally what we're here for. We're here to help you with the research. We're here to help you with the copyright. So yeah, don't kind of sit there and get yourself in a state. Please get the help if you need it. Any questions to wrap up session? I've thrown a lot at you, so if you're unsure and you just want to go, oh, I don't want to ask that question in case I seem silly, please feel free to reach out after the session to the email address. There are no dumb questions with copyright, trust me. You might think it's a simple, stupid question, but it turns out yours is the example that has, you know, that extra little bit that other people might not have thought of, and then it becomes a whole different question. Silence.
There's still nothing in the chat at this stage, Anthony.
Okay.
So, yep.
So again, just to reinforce the support options, copyright, you can also call me directly on this. There are times that I'm off doing other things. So if I don't get to answer the phone, it actually generates an email to my account, and I can actually hear what you've said. So if I'm off cancel or whatever. There's also a link there to take you to the research liaison librarians.
I've also put those links in the chat as well.
So that's what this page looks like. So you basically just go to your school, open it up, and you'll see, oh, look, there's Nicole.
Thank you.
And that was not on purpose. You can basically find out who your person is, and there's full contact details there. Now, just going to plug this, even though you're probably sick of me plugging it. Creative Commons, there's a lot to know around this, and some of it's very, very simple, and some of it doesn't hurt to get that little bit of extra support. So if you are interested in learning more about publishing with Creative Commons or reusing Creative Commons material, 10 a.m. Thursday, the 19th of May, we're going to have an in-depth look at the license and actual practical examples that have come into me and that I've talked to people through, just so you get an idea of how that works.
I've also just put a link in the chat for any of those upcoming webinars.
Yes, and I'm going to leave this up on the screen here. This series of webinars is put together for researchers and HDR students, and we've kind of, for this initial batch, we've thought about what you might like to see, but we're really keen to hear feedback on the sessions and also what you might like to see in the future. So that's the survey link there, newcastle.libwizard.com/F, the form, I guess, /researcher_HDR. But Jenny's put that link into the chat. And we do not know who is replying. So Liz, for example, if you're like, Anthony, you didn't answer my questions with enough depth, I'm not going to know it's you. So yes, please feel free to do any kind of response in there. All feedback, it will be gratefully accepted. I will come back to this slide, but I just need to quickly show this credit screen just to meet my copyright requirements for the stuff that I've shown, just so that it's captured as part of the recording. La-di-da-di-da. Okay, pause that if you need to read it. And I'll just keep that on the screen. So did anyone have any further questions? No.
Nothing in the chat at the moment, Anthony.
I think that was the last of the slides, yes. So we'll just have that there. So thank you all for coming. As I said, if you do need any kind of support for copyright licensing, please reach out. And if you're not sure about who to contact around your thesis publications, please reach out to us at Copyright, and we'll get it sorted. If we don't deal with it ourselves, we'll make sure it gets dealt with.
There is a question that's just come in, Anthony, and I'll just go to it. Can you use courtesy of if you have received approval from the person's personal work that you are using their material?
Yes, it is actually something that comes up a fair bit. It's like, oh, my friend took these photos and she's allowing me to use them in my thesis. Lots of examples of this. So yeah, you can basically whatever attribution statement they like, you can put in. Reprinted with permission or reproduced with permission is kind of that standard line. But if they've just said, oh, you know, just put courtesy of, that's perfectly fine too. I do suggest though that you add a copyright statement for them to it, just so that it's clear that somebody else owns the copyright on that one in case somebody else decides they want to reuse those photos. So always a good idea to make it clear who owns what. Okay, so thank you all for coming. Next week, to be honest, I'm not actually sure what the next session is. We do
It's
have
on
another.
predatory publishing because that's my Guernsey again.
Oh, there we go. So predatory publishing. So yeah, we're really trying to look after the researchers and HDR students as part of this. So predatory publishing is a big thing you should be careful of. And then back on the 19th, we're doing that one around open licensing with Creative Commons. So thank you all for coming, and please tune in again. This will go onto YouTube for those that want to go back and replay. I'm going to stop recording now.